In this episode, we're joined by Katelyn Greenawalt, sports scientist at FC Dallas.
She is a U.S. Soccer C license coach and is currently pursuing her CSCS certification. Katelyn shares her path into sports science, what it's like working with elite athletes, and how she bridges the gap between data and development.
Whether you're a coach, player, or just curious about the science behind the game, this one's for you. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Katelyn. We're super excited to have you on. We want to ask you first to just share a little bit about your journey, how you ended up working at FC Dallas and worked your way up into the MLS as a sports scientist.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll try to keep a long story short here, but like a lot of people in sports science, my path wasn't exactly linear. I actually stopped playing soccer at 17 after a knee injury. My team was pay to play at the time, and my parents understandably didn't want to keep paying for me to sit on the bench. But my twin sister was on the team, so I had to go to every game anyway. And honestly, it was tough. It was hard watching your team compete without you when all you wanted to do is play. So I started writing out my frustrations, thinking about what our team could be doing better. And I realized I love the strategy side of the game. I loved analyzing, thinking through solutions. And that's what first sparked my interest in becoming a soccer coach.
That's awesome.
From there, I asked myself, what's the biggest thing that I could accomplish as a soccer coach? And my ultimate goal became clear. I wanted to become one of the first women to coach a men's professional team. And that was the ambition that drove everything I did moving forward. Then that mindset led me to the Sales University, where I earned a bachelor's in sport management with a concentration in coaching. And that's where I got my first exposure to GPS units and basic athlete monitoring. And when our new head coach, Anna Kate, came in the following year.
You're welcome.
Yeah, she had asked me, what I helped with before, and I had told her I had assisted with planning sessions, field setup, and I had worked with a bit of GPS units. And she said, "Perfect, you're in charge of GPS now." But the only issue was, and coach, I don't know if you know this, is that I really only knew how to turn them on.
You didn't know what you were doing.
I only knew how to turn them on and download the data. That was it. But instead of
comes out now, Katelyn.
Hey, I want to make a good I want to make a good impression. But instead of backing away, I leaned into it. I took it as a challenge, and I started diving into it, and even took some data analytics classes on the side with my free electives. And that's when it clicked for me that I could combine my love for coaching, my passion for injury prevention, and then this newfound interest in data analytics. So I wanted to build on that. Shortly after, I decided to pursue a master's in sports science and analytics from Linfield University. And as part of that program, I had to complete an internship. I timed it with the MLS hiring cycle. I applied to a few clubs, and FC Dallas ended up bringing me on as their first team soccer science intern for the 2023 season. I had 2 weeks to move across the country to a state I never stepped foot in. I had to find an apartment, pack up my car, but I made it happen. And it was a huge risk, both financially and personally. But I knew that this could be the opportunity that could jumpstart everything. And after a full year internship, I graduated a semester early, right as the MLS mandated that every team must have a sports scientist on staff, and the timing couldn't have been better. I've been full-time ever since, and now I'm headed into my 3rd season with FC Dallas.
That's so exciting. Yeah. And, the part you didn't share, I know, is that you started in Pennsylvania, right? And Linfield brought you out to Oregon, right?
Yep.
So, and then Oregon brought you down to Texas. So you've hit all parts of the country. And, at the time, regardless of you knowing or not knowing the GPS systems, obviously I had a little background in it, and I feel like it worked really well. I will say that when you left, it was greatly missed in that department. So, in that side of I couldn't do it the same without you. So even regardless, it was really good. For those listening who don't know, Katelyn was my manager and assistant student assistant coach, and GPS monitor plugger in and take, yeah, they didn't get plugged in on time when I was trying to do it on my own. That's for sure. But thank you for sharing that. It's really, I think it'd be really good for people to hear about like how you turned either challenges, injury, minor opportunities. Like something that really stuck out was you taking your free elective to do something. Like it almost just feels like everything like fell in the way it was supposed to, but not how you planned at all.
Yeah.
That's really assuring, I think, for people to hear. Like everyone can kind of, I think, relate to that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I feel like it definitely just seems like one of those everything happens for a reason
Yeah.
moments. And like you might not realize that like when you were a teenager and you wanted to play and you couldn't play anymore, you're just like, oh, this is not what I wanted to do, but it brought you to where you are now, which is incredible.
Yeah. And the people in your like people in your corner, even probably your sister, your family, everyone supporting you to do all this type of stuff. So um
Yeah, that's great. So, since you kind of were involved with like so many different levels, like you played up until high school, then you went and worked with the sales, and now you're at the MLS. So, for you, like, what are some key physical like attributes that you see differentiate elite players from just normal everyday players?
Yeah, I won't go too deep into it, as it varies between, by position and by playing style. But I think what really separates elite players is their ability to perform consistently, like high intensity actions, not just in moments, but throughout the match, right? Their physical resilience and their ability to handle load and recover quickly is often, I think, that invisible difference between the good and the great.
Oh wow, that word, invisible difference. That was snaps right there. That was really that stood out to me, and I think it's important for any players listening, or even any coaches listening to have kind of their standards. I
Mhm.
think it's really big into we just had some ODP coaches talk about regional pathway. We had college coaches talk about recruitment pathway. And one of the biggest things they talked about was fitness. And like they said, you mentioned different positional responsibilities and the older players get, understanding that. And that's something we looked into at DeSales. But I think also, you know, having that understanding that it's controllable at any level, right? That fitness, in that aspect. But that kind of, I want to just transition it into another question. Obviously, putting your body through that much load, your part of your role is load management, you know, understanding players' weaknesses, seeing how much they played. Do you feel that there's a biggest injury risk in pro soccer or even youth soccer? I mean, they play so many games. Um, Even in MLS, they play so many games in the professional leagues with all the domestic tournaments and things like that as well that go on at the same time. How do you at FC Dallas or just in general that you've learned mitigate risk of injury in players because it's so prominent?
Yeah, I think our approach to injury prevention is really layered, right? It starts with managing your workload, making sure you're not over or under training players. And then we build on it within individualized strength programs to target specific needs. And then we also use monitoring, or we also monitor fatigue through tools like RPE and wellness check-ins. But I think honestly, the most important tool is that we have is communication, right? Those daily check-ins, the small conversation, noticing when something feels off or looks off. That human element, just being present and proactive, often helps us catch issues before they become real problems.
Yeah.
No, that's great to hear. And maybe it's going into a later question as well, but um, nothing you said cost money. Like anyone can do this anyone can do that at any level, right? Like anyone can have the conversation with their player, um, if it's the youth level with a parent. So thank you for sharing that and it wasn't data points or
Mhm.
I think the buzz term load management gets a pretty like negative connotation right now that people think players are resting or needing to rest, but I think it is something really important that you can just have a conversation about.
Yeah. And I also think it kind of comes down to like knowing your players and knowing your team. Like you see one player that's kind of like your ball of energy that's constantly doing circles around people during practice and they're off one day, you know something's not right. So it's just kind
Yeah.
of paying attention to your players and realizing what they're like on a normal day and if they're being off, then you know something's up and you got to kind of communicate with them like you said and talk to them about it.
Yeah, and I guess with your situation too, you're like in a chain of command, right? Like sometimes if you're in the youth realm, you're the one that has to see it, and maybe you're just having that conversation with a parent. But in yours, you're like you have the physios, you have the trainers, the first team staff, so I'm sure it's very extensive in terms of those conversations as well.
So, in a male-dominated field, what is some advice that you would give young women aspiring to work in sports science or even just at the professional level itself?
Yeah, I'd say, don't wait until you feel qualified enough to step into these spaces. You already bring value. Your perspective, your lived experiences, your voice matter. So be curious, ask questions, take up space, and don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Find mentors, build a network, and back yourself up because you're already more capable than you think.
Mm.
And honestly, if you care, you are already more qualified than most because caring drives you to want to be better, to keep learning, to pursue courses or certifications that ultimately help support your athletes. And I believe that that level of commitment and intention is what truly sets people apart in this field.
I love that.
Yeah, that was amazing. One of the advice that I've always been given that I love is like you should always invest in yourself. And like that's kind of what you're saying. I know you're working on your CSCS, you have your C license, you have a lot of your masters, a lot of credentials, but you did all that because you loved it and you want to be good at what you do. And understand that. So I think this is an important question. Can you do your best for someone who doesn't understand? There's a lot of coaches out there who don't even understand what sports science is. It's such a it's not new, but it used to just be research. It used to just be people coming in and doing research on athletes, teams, mainly males as well. But in your best, way, how would you describe sports science and how would you describe it in the game of football or soccer?
That's really tough. Because I think sports science is really right. It's an umbrella term. So it really varies between team to team, right? My position with FC Dallas is going to look differently to all the teams across the league. Like you have to understand, everything essentially, right? You have to understand the psychology, the nutrition, the strength and conditioning, treatment plans, rehab. Like you have to understand everything that goes along with it, and how it can play a part, right? If you're traveling, how does that affect your athletes? Sleep, nutrition wise, and then yeah, like I said, it's just
And then it's your job to piece it together to try and give them
yeah,
the best
essentially,
opportunity.
yeah. I would say like going off of that, it's always been there, right? Like through your strength, if you're looking at like a traditional team that has, strength coaches, right? Your strength coaches potentially did that. Like years ago, our equipment manager, he has told me that he used to download the GPS, right?
Yes.
So someone did it. It just wasn't, collected maybe the best way possible. It wasn't really analyzed. It was just like, hey, this is something that we have to do. Here, we're gonna download it, and then we're gonna see if it actually does something.
Okay.
So it's always been there, and mostly I would say like it always fell on like a performance or a strength coach. And now we're just finally getting our own title and being able to kind of to help bring value to those numbers and not just say, hey, it's just something that we can do and we have if we need it. It's like, no, we can actually see in real time, hey, I want to make sure that these guys are making these accelerations and decelerations and sprints, you know, during that workload and on these certain days, so we can prepare them for that match so they can
Like perform
do
how
their
you want.
best. Yeah,
Yeah.
perform how you want them in the game.
And then I'm assuming it's specific to your team's tactics and how the coaching staff wants them to play. Like, do you have those, does your sports science staff have that conversation?
I would say so, yeah. Like the coaches know, right, that on these certain days throughout our microcycle that we need them to get their sprints in. So does that mean we have to, you know, adjust maybe a drill or two? We might have to, or can we, you know, do the sprints to and from this drill to this drill, right? Can we get our sprints in? So it's kind of, we need to do this like as performance, but we're also working with the coaches of saying, hey, can we do this? Or how can we adjust this? I know you want to do small sided, but maybe it's more beneficial if we, you know, add this into the mix. What you want to do. So we're having those little conversations, kind of pushing each other, saying, hey, we need this for athletes, but I understand from a tactical standpoint, you need this. Can we make a compromise?
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, you know me, I nerd out about this stuff, background in it. And yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
We didn't write this question down, but I'm actually like pretty curious. Like, what are some like simple things for youth coaches or clubs or leagues to do that like obviously they're not going to have like the GPS. They're not going to have the technology that you have, but like what are some like easy things that at the youth level like these teams and leagues can implement to really like shift to have like a sports science focus? I guess not focus, but like like kind of implement sports science into it so they're focusing on the development and obviously they want to win too, but more so focusing on that development like you said.
So I love this question because great sports science doesn't mean that you have to have high-tech gadgets or like complex data systems. At its core, it's about being intentional with how you plan and observe your training. And there's some really simple and effective ways that coaches can bring these principles in, no matter what level you're working at. So I'd say like the first you can start with is something as simple as RPE, which is the rate of perceived exertion. Just ask your players after a session, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard was that? It sounds simple, but it gives you a quick read on the workload and helps make sure you're not overloading or underloading them over time. Another big one is balancing your sessions. So not every day needs to be high intensity. Mix in more technical or tactical focused days between your more physical, like heavier physical sessions. That kind of variation helps avoid burnout and supports long-term development. And, I know I mentioned this, I just got my C license. So I think for coaches that are kind of going down that pathway, I think this is a great start if you already don't have a background in microcycles or periodization. And then there's some stuff that we tend to overlook, like warm-ups and cooldowns. A proper dynamic warm-up preps the body and helps reduce injury risk. And then, a cooldown with some light mobility or stretching can help with recovery. And you don't need a weight room to start, basic strength work like lunges, squats, push-ups, core work. Those body weight exercise build resilience and help reduce injuries, especially for growing athletes. But honestly, the most important tool you have is your coaching eye and your ability to listen. So if you're noticing when players are slowing down and getting sloppy with their technique or just moving, differently towards the end of the session, that's the fatigue talking. And fatigue is one of the biggest contributors to injury risk. So sometimes just taking, 2 minutes to check in with that player tells you more than any wearable device could ever. So my advice is like, don't worry about what you don't have. Use what you do have, your awareness, your communication, your planning. Those are your best sports science tools. And if you stay consistent with them, you'll be setting your players up for more safer, more smarter, and more effective development.
I love that.
Yeah.
That was such a great response.
Like mic drop right there.
Yeah.
And it's true that it doesn't have to just be like the trace, the VO, the playmaker, the GPS vest, everything. Yes, those things are important and they can help at the highest levels, at the youth level. But at the end of the day, there's people out there, and you just have to check in and treat them as such. So thank you for that.
I also want to say too is like with the numbers, like high numbers is not always equal good. Low numbers is not always equal bad, right? So if say you're having like a wingback position, you have your right and left, right? The left ran 10,000, we do meters, sorry, we do instead of miles, but say he ran like 10,000 meters, right? And the right ran 8,000. And you're like, man, the guy on the right had, if you're just looking at total distance, he did not have a good game. But depending on, you know, your opponent, depending on the weather, depending on how the game is, if you're having more success on the left side of the field, that player is going to be up more. That does not mean that that player was more successful. It just means, hey, we're going to go down the side of the field that we have more success in. And same with maybe that player is going up too high in his wingback position. So he's having to cover more ground because he's out of position all the time. So having a high number does not, again, mean that that's a good thing, and low doesn't equal a bad thing. Same with like our goalkeepers, right? If they're making a lot of saves, that looks good. But what does that say about our back line? What does that say about our midfield? Why do we keep having shots on goal against us? Like, yeah, he had a good game because he made a lot of saves, but that does not look good for our field players. So
yeah, I think you're hinting at like data, collecting data is important, but interpreting it is more important than collecting it. Like you said, the wind could have been blowing across the flanks of the field and the ball was flying to the left side more. Like it could be as simple as that. Or our team tactics was to attack the right back. So we decided to go, you know, down that more. But yeah, no, so no, it's spot on. This is everything that I hope anyone who listens would want to hear. All right, so obviously, you know, sports science is a growing field, and your role is unique compared to playing, coaching, covering, managing. So you mentioned a little bit about your journey, but what drew you to this field? And if there's any other, you know, girls in a similar setting, how can you prep them, you know, for this type of journey?
Yeah, so what really drew me in was like to this field was the combination performance, injury prevention, and strategy. I didn't just want to work with athletes. I wanted to understand why things happen on a physiological level and how we can make smarter decisions to support their development and keep them on the field. And honestly, having gone through an injury myself, that experience made me even more driven to be a part of the solution for others. And then as for advice, my biggest piece of advice is don't wait until you feel like you're an expert. I actually don't like that word because I feel like it implies that your knowledge has a limit. And when in reality, you know, learning in this field never stops. So I would say be curious, take initiative, and say yes to opportunities that challenge you, even if you don't feel 100% ready. When I first met one of my mentors, he told me, though well-intended, right, that I probably wasn't ready for the internship at FC Dallas. And to be fair, he wasn't completely wrong, right? I was in over my head at times, but if I had listened and waited until I felt fully prepared, I would have missed a chance to chase my dreams of working for a professional team. So I'd say in summary, right, you learn by doing, by asking questions, by surrounding yourself with people who push you to grow. You don't need to have a perfect background. What you need is passion, work ethic, and a willingness to figure things out along the way.
That's amazing.
Your truth bombs are just so good today. I
But
think
you're so right though. Like I feel like your brain is always trying to tell you like you're not ready for this. You're not good enough for this, but then you go and you surprise yourself. Like you know deep down that you are ready for it. You're ready for any challenge, any task at hand, but your brain always has that little bit of doubt, and there's nothing better than just like proving yourself wrong. Obviously, it's great to prove other people wrong, but like proving yourself wrong is probably the best because it's like deep down you know that you are good and you're ready for it.
Yeah, and I think like you talk about that balance of self-doubt and resiliency and just going for it. And I think that that's something, um, you know, Morgan and I recently went to a, what was that, like a women's symposium thing?
Yep.
and they talked about how very often there's like a statistic about women not applying for jobs if they, you know, of all the bullet points, if they don't have a certain percentage, they're not going to apply. And you're already limiting yourself. Obviously, you're not trying to put yourself in any situations that it's just so out in left field that you shouldn't be, you know, getting yourself into. But if you have a drive and a passion and a care, like you've talked about, then what's it hurt to try? And if you fail, you fail. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But at least you bet on yourself. So I'm happy for you that you bet on yourself in that moment, and that you and your mentor, you know, that's the point of a mentor, someone that can challenge you and question you and ground you. And even in that moment, you still were able to have that relationship and have that conversation. And,
Mm-hmm.
now you've made a career out of that decision. So
We believe in the power of women driving the game. We like to end each interview with the same final question for our guest. So, if you had to choose just one word to describe women shaping the future of the game, what would that word be?
Man, that's a really hard one. But I would have to say innovative, because women are, constantly introducing new ideas and leading advancements that are redefining, sports science in soccer.
I love that.
yeah. And I think it's something where, not being afraid to speak up and being confident and kind of top to bottom. I feel it's a perfect way to end this, because I feel like it full circled between your journey. And you never let yourself like feel like there was a ceiling. Like you just kind of kept trying to work as hard as you can, as high as you can, with your goals. Do you still want to coach a men's pro team?
Honestly, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see.
On a staff or
see.
something.
Yeah. I would love to get back into coaching. I'm trying to pick up a youth team here in the next, hopefully, couple months. We'll see.
Awesome. That is kind of a good way to end. Like, what's next for you? Is there any way that, obviously a lot of our listeners might be Union fans, but is there any way that we can follow along with anything that you're doing with FC Dallas, or anything that you want to share with that?
I would just say right now I'm focused on continuing to like grow into my role and keep pushing performance standards at FC Dallas, but feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat with others trying to break into the field and learn more about sports science.
Amazing. Thank you again, Katelyn. It was fun catching up with you. I'm really proud to see how far you've gone in the field, and excited to be able to share everything that you've done and the way you've grown in the game. So thank you so much for hopping on today.
Yeah, thank you.